What do you think is the best way to convince someone to do or not to do something, to change his behavior? Well, let me tell you two very different stories. This woman is Carrie Nation. On December 27, 1900, Carrie went to Wichita, Kansas. She went to the Carey Hotel, a very elegant establishment in town, and she moved to the bar where many people were having their drinks. Carrie took an axe she was hiding under a long dress, and she destroyed the bar and every glass of alcohol she was finding on her way. That was just one out of the 30 bars that Carrie destroyed in her long career. Carrie was part of the temperance movement, which was one of the many movements supporting the larger prohibition movement in the United States at the beginning of the 20th century. And the two major goals of the prohibition movement were reducing the consumption of alcohol and reducing the supposedly correlated crime rate. Well, despite the expectations, the results of this huge social experiment have been very different. The consumption of alcohol, yes, it decreased in the first year of prohibition, but it bumped up to 60 or even 70% of the pre-prohibition level in the latest year. And regarding crime rate, well, it even increased, and as we all know, prohibition even led to the birth of the organized crime in the United States. So, to sum up, they wanted to change a behavior. They only prohibited that behavior. It didn't work. Let me tell you another story. China, 1998. Everything was in place to allow the booming of the Chinese economy as we know it nowadays. Well, but the Chinese government had a problem, tax collection. They weren't able to collect taxes efficiently. So what they did, they came up with another social experiment in certain areas of the country, and they created a receipt lottery. So basically citizens, they were able to join this lottery just by collecting receipt from transactions. What happens is that the tax revenues for the government increase overall up to 17%, and the tax revenue in the areas where the experiment was in place increased more than 21% compared to the areas where the experiment was not in place. Again, to sum up, they wanted to change a behavior. They not only prohibited that behavior, but they also incentivized a good behavior, and it worked fantastically. But since alcohol prohibition and tax collection are not the most urgent issues for us all, let's talk about an issue that literally affects everyone living on this planet, climate change. Let me give you a general reminder of what climate change is about. Well, when carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere, it acts like a blanket, preventing heat from escaping. And this leads to one of the most obvious effects, which is an outer world, or as we call it, global warming. But why an outer world is so dangerous for our planet? Well, an outer world leads to a wetter world, which means that higher temperature causes glaciers to melt and sea level to rise. And this puts in great danger not only coastal cities, but also entire island nations that risk to go underwater in the next decades. An outer world brings to more extreme weather conditions. The number of hurricanes and megastorms have gone from one every 100 years to once every 16 years, so way more often. And eventually, unfortunately, an outer world brings to worsen inequality and conflict. But why is that? Well, because higher temperature leads to crops to be more difficult to be harvested. And in those areas of the world, the poorest areas of the world, when the population is not able to harvest crops, and so to get food, they tend to migrate. And if we combine migration with scarcity of resources, what we get is higher probability of conflict and war. There is a very interesting study that says that 8 out of the 10 countries hosting the largest multilateral peace operation are countries that are highly exposed to climate change. So this is again one of the worst effects of global warming, of an outer world. But how do we stop global warming? Well, that's pretty obvious. We need to reduce CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gases emissions. But a mere reduction in quantity is not enough. We need to reduce them as fast as we can. And that's because if we want to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement, we first need to reach a peak in emissions between 2020 and 2030, and then we can see a decline in those emissions. But the longer it takes to reach this peak, then the faster and more aggressive this reduction will have to be, and so it will have more and more difficult to achieve. When it comes to reducing emissions, we have three major players that, let's say, comes into play, that play a crucial role. We have governments, we have consumers, and we have businesses. For sake of simplicity, let's assume that consumers represent the demand of products and services, businesses represent traditionally the supply, and governments just oversee and regulate this relationship between demand and supply. Where for a long time, we have mostly focused on the supply of sustainable product and service. And focusing on the supply has been the right things to do. Because before we stimulate strongly a demand for sustainable product and service, we need to be sure that these products are, first of all, available in the market. They are as much effective and efficient as the high emission equivalent, and they are available in the market at the same price or even at a cheaper price than the high emission equivalent. So again, focusing on the supply of products and services, of sustainable products and services, has been the right things to do. But now it's time to focus on the demand. There is another very peculiar and interesting study that says that nearly 2/3 of emissions are caused by direct or indirect forms of human consumption. And still, according to this study, if we change human consumption toward a more sustainable lifestyle, we will be able to reduce this emission up to 36 or even 38%. So, to sum up, to stop global warming, we need to reduce greenhouse gases emission at the fastest possible pace. And we have learned that human consumption, consumer behavior, impacts crucially on the reduction of those emissions. So, if we want to stop global warming, we need to change consumer behavior, people behavior, toward a more sustainable lifestyle as fast as we can. But how do we change people behavior? How do we change consumer behavior? Well, we have learned at the beginning of this talk that we have two major ways to change someone's behavior. We can either prohibit, punish a behavior, or we can incentivize a good behavior. Well, when it comes to sustainability, for many years, for many decades, governments and local authorities have been focusing only on prohibiting non-sustainable behaviors. For example, don't drive your diesel vehicle in city center on weekends, or recycle your trash or you'll get a fine. And even if this has been the right things to do, because this has allowed us to draw a clear and official line between what is good and what is not when it comes to sustainability, well, even if this has been good at the beginning, in the long run, this approach, focused only on prohibiting, has proved to be insufficient. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here talking about how to defeat climate change. In my opinion, when it comes to change large masses behavior, we need to apply what psychologists call a positive reinforcement, which means basically a reward that follows a certain action. And when it comes to apply a positive reinforcement to change people's behaviors in relationship to sustainability, so to convince people to act sustainably, well, we have many real-life possibilities, real-life options to actually incentivize people, to incentivize consumers to behave more sustainably. Let me just mention some of them. We can incentivize people to use sustainable means of transportation. So, for example, electric vehicles instead of traditional ICE vehicles. We can use positive reinforcement to incentivize people to purchase sustainable grocery or sustainable clothes. Or even better, we can incentivize people to choose renewable source of energy instead of the traditional ones. But when it comes to positive reinforcement in relationship to sustainability in particular, we have two types of, of positive reinforcement. We have what I would call a financial reward, a financial reinforcement, And again, when it comes to financial reinforcement, we have two major actors that can effectively activate this kind of reinforcement. We have governments, and let's say the traditional rewards for governments is a fiscal benefit, so act sustainably and you get some sort of fiscal benefit. And we have NGOs and brands. In particular, brands are, let's say, brands can really incentivize their consumers to purchase and use their sustainable products and services instead of the non-sustainable ones. And they can even leverage on all the more traditional features of loyalty scheme and loyalty programs like points, coins, tiers to actually gamify and make even more funnier this process and so more effective. But brands can also incentivize consumers for certain behaviors that are maybe not directly related to the core business of the brand itself. Another real-life example, UK, London, a few years ago, citizens of a certain neighborhood, they were able to sign up to a reward scheme that allowed them to earn points for the weight of trash they were recycling. And they could be able to spend those points at local merchants in the neighborhood itself. What happens? Well, recycling in that neighborhood increased up to 35%. This is, again, another example of how brands, thanks to, in this case, a financial reinforcement, could not only incentivize the purchase of their sustainable product and services, but also behaviors that go a little bit beyond their core business. But if we really want to change consumer behaviors, we can't just rely on, let's say, on a financial reward. We need to combine a financial reward with what I will call an emotional reward. What's an emotional reward? An emotional reward is something that touches, let's say, the inner cores of the individual, something that plays with the emotions of the individual. And when it comes to sustainability, the most effective emotional reward, in my opinion, is feeling part of a sustainable circle, of a sustainable community. Well, and in this case, if we want to change people's behavior even more effectively using an emotional reward, we don't have just to make feel people belonging to a sustainable community, but we need to make them feel belonging to a cool, sustainable community, to a proactive, sustainable community. And that comes another goal that we all should achieve, making sustainability cooler, making sustainability cool. And so all the, let's say, movements like Friday for Futures, or the endorsement of celebrities and influencers to the cause of sustainability have helped a lot and have played a crucial role to achieve this goal, to make sustainability cool. So, to conclude, climate change and global warming are the most urgent and compelling issues of our generations. But we can't stop that, we can defeat that if we just rely on governments telling us what to do and what not to do. We need to believe in the power that us, as individuals, have not only in changing things, but also in influencing other people to change their behavior. We, consumers, brands, governments, all together, thanks to positive reinforcement and the power of incentive, have the possibility to defeat climate change and to guarantee a brighter future to our children and to the next generation. Thank you.